In 52 BC, Julius Caesar walked into the deadliest trap of the ancient world, outnumbered 6-1, surrounded on both sides with nowhere to run. Retreat, and the revolt spreads across Gaul. Attack, and his legions die under the walls. Wait, and 250,000 Gallic warriors seal the trap shut behind him. Caesar picked a fourth option. Instead of fighting his way out, he built his way out. In under 4 weeks, the Roman army raised a nearly 40-kilometer double wall of fortifications, turning themselves into the besieged and the besiegers at the same time. So how does an isolated army beat those kinds of numbers on 2 fronts at once? That's what we're digging into today, how Caesar turned lines on a map into a physical death trap, and how Rome finished off Gaul with shovels and timber as much as with swords. To understand why Caesar stopped at Alesia, you need to understand the war he was actually fighting. By 52 BC, he'd spent 6 years tearing through Gaul, crushing tribe after tribe, crossing the Rhine, raiding Britain, pushing Roman power farther than any general before him. On paper, Gaul was conquered. In reality, it was on fire. Caesar had always won by exploiting Gallic disunity, beat one tribe while the rest watched. But conquest breeds something armies can't easily divide: shared hatred. That hatred finally found a leader in Vercingetorix, a young nobleman of the Arverni, who did what no Gallic commander had managed before: turned scattered tribes into a coalition with one military direction. Vercingetorix understood Caesar's real weakness: the legions needed to eat. So instead of meeting Rome head-on, he starved it. Towns burned before Caesar could occupy them. Grain stores destroyed before Roman foragers reached them. Cavalry harassed the columns and cut supply lines, forcing the legions to march through land stripped bare on purpose. For a while it worked, and then came Gergovia, where Caesar's legions were thrown back with heavy losses, one of the rare defeats of his career. For the tribes, it proved Rome could bleed. For Caesar's enemies back in Rome, it proved something worse: Caesar could fail. But Vercingetorix's coalition ran on momentum, and a major cavalry battle changed everything. Caesar's horsemen, backed by Germanic auxiliaries, crushed the Gallic cavalry. With his mounted troops gutted, an open battle against the legions too risky, Vercingetorix pulled back into the hilltop stronghold of Alesia with roughly 80,000 men. This wasn't a retreat, it was a trap. Alesia sat on a high plateau, guarded by steep slopes, rivers, and brutal approaches. A direct assault would have been a bloodbath. The plan: hold the fortress while riders slipped out to raise a massive relief army from across Gaul. Once that army arrived, Caesar would be pinned in the valley, Vercingetorix pushing out from the fortress, the relief force closing in from behind. Most commanders would have backed off. Caesar saw an opportunity instead. If he couldn't take Alesia by storm, he could turn the whole landscape around it into a cage. So he didn't retreat, and he didn't storm the walls. He told his men to start digging. What Caesar built at Alesia is staggering even by modern standards. Field fortifications weren't new. Roman legions had used them for centuries, Caesar included. What set Alesia apart was the scale, the speed, and the tactical thinking behind it. The problem was pure geometry. Keep 80,000 men from breaking out of Alesia while keeping an even larger relief force from breaking in. 2 threats, opposite directions. One army stuck in the middle. The answer was 2 concentric rings. The inner ring, the circumvallation, faced Alesia and was built to seal Vercingetorix's men inside. Caesar's engineers traced roughly 11 kilometers of line along the natural contours of the terrain. Some modern estimates push that closer to 15. Building a continuous timber and earth wall about 4 meters high, reinforced with towers at intervals. In front of it, 2 ditches, the inner one flooded wherever the ground allowed, forcing attackers to wade through water under fire before they even reached the wall. The outer ring, the contravallation, faced the opposite way, toward the hills the relief army would come from. It mirrored the inner wall but ran even longer, around 21 kilometers, wrapping the entire Roman position in a closed loop. Between the 2 rings sat the Roman camp itself: 8 major legionary camps, 23 smaller forts placed on key hills, river crossings, and approach routes, all connected by a network of internal roads so troops could be rushed to any threatened stretch of wall within minutes. That alone would count as a massive undertaking. Caesar's engineers didn't stop there. In front of both walls, they laid down a gauntlet of obstacles. First felled trees with branches sharpened and interlocked, breaking up any charge and funneling attackers into planned kill zones. Behind that, concealed pits about a meter deep with sharpened stakes at the bottom, hidden under woven branches and leaves. Caesar himself nicknamed them lilies, a grim little joke for something built to shatter ankles and impale men in the dark. Behind the pits, a final layer of iron spikes set into buried stakes, invisible until a boot came down on one. In some stretches, this obstacle belt ran nearly 100 meters deep. Any army moving at night with no idea what lay ahead was walking into a kill zone long before it ever touched the wall. The speed was just as remarkable as the design. Work started in late summer 52 BC, and the core structure was finished in 3 to 4 weeks, an almost industrial feat of coordinated labor. The 52,000 Romans weren't all soldiers in the traditional sense. There were engineers, surveyors, and craftsmen among them, but most of the digging fell to the legionaries. Each man had his section. Timber came from the surrounding forests. Earth pulled from the ditches went straight into the ramparts behind them. Nothing was wasted. Every shovelful dug out became part of the wall, protecting the men who dug it. It's worth sitting with that for a second. Roman legionaries trained for close order combat and fought with pilum and gladius, but they were just as much professional builders, capable of turning weeks of labor into finished fortifications on demand. That dual skill, soldier and engineer in one, was one of the quiet advantages of the Roman military machine, and nowhere did it matter more than at Alesia. By the time the relief army Vercingetorix had summoned showed up on the surrounding hills, the walls were already standing. Caesar's trap was set. The only question left was whether it would hold. The relief army that arrived in late September 52 BC was big enough to see from miles off. Ancient sources, mainly Caesar's own account and Plutarch's, put the number anywhere from 180,000 to 250,000 infantry, plus tens of thousands of cavalry. Modern historians argue over these figures the way they argue over most ancient troop counts, and the real number was likely on the lower end even so. A cautious estimate still puts the relief force at 4 to 6 times the size of the army trying to hold it back. The relief commanders had an immediate problem. The outer wall stood between them and Caesar's army, and they needed to break through it at the exact moment Vercingetorix broke out from the inside. Hit both walls at once and the Romans would be stretched thin, fighting in 2 directions. On paper, that was the scenario that should have doomed the Roman position. In practice, it exposed both how solid Caesar's engineering was and how fractured the Gallic coalition really was underneath its numbers. The first assault came by day. Gallic cavalry charged the outer wall while Vercingetorix pushed infantry against the inner ring at the same time. A coordinated, deliberate attempt to exploit the Roman army's two-front problem. But the obstacle belt did its job. Cavalry moving fast across open ground hit the sharpened stakes and tangled branches before it could build any momentum, and units broke apart. The hidden pits caused chaos as men fell in and blocked the ranks behind them. By the time anyone reached the wall, they'd already been slowed and scattered, giving Roman defenders plenty of time to rain missiles down from above. First assault failed. The night attack that followed was different. Under cover of darkness, Gallic infantry pushed forward with bundles of earth and brush to fill the ditches and bridge the obstacles, and in some spots they managed it. Darkness erased much of the advantage Roman archers and slingers held in daylight, and along parts of the wall, the fighting turned brutally close. Caesar's answer was a system of fire signals spaced along both rings. Whenever a section came under real pressure, the signal traveled down the line, and reserves moved through the internal road network to reinforce it. That rapid response wasn't luck. It was the system working exactly as designed. Then came the third assault, the real crisis point. Gallic commanders, after probing the perimeter, found a weak spot on the northwest stretch of the outer wall, where the fortification had to skirt a hill instead of running along its crest, a stretch that was harder to watch and harder to reinforce. They threw roughly 60,000 infantry at it. It nearly worked. The section came under pressure from both sides at once, outside forces pressing the outer wall, Vercingetorix's men pushing the inner wall at the matching point, and the defenders there were briefly overrun, with the outer rampart breached in one spot. Caesar later described this stretch of the battle as genuinely uncertain. The Roman response wasn't heroics, it was structure. Reserve cavalry held inside the perimeter rode out through a gate in the inner wall, swung around the outside of the contravallation, and hit the attacking force from the flank and rear. At the same time, more infantry moved up through the road network. The attackers, already disorganized from the obstacle fields, broke under the surprise attack. Vercingetorix's matching breakout attempt failed too, partly because the breach outside had already been sealed before he could exploit it. What those three assaults proved wasn't that Caesar's system was flawless. It wasn't. There were real close calls, moments where a section of wall was hanging by a thread. But the system was never built to stop every attack outright. It was built so no single failure could bring the whole thing down. The obstacle fields bought time, the signal network bought time, the road system bought time. And at Alesia, time was the one resource on Caesar's side. And what came after once the final assault failed and the relief army began dissolving, tribal contingents peeling off as victory slipped away. Vercingetorix had nothing left. The food was gone, the garrison was spent, the relief force had scattered. The next morning he rode out of Alesia's gates in full armor and surrendered to Caesar, circling his tribunal in silence before dismounting without a word. Caesar accepted the surrender and put him in chains. Vercingetorix spent 6 years as a prisoner in Rome, was paraded in Caesar's triumph, and was executed in 46 BC. The war in Gaul dragged on for 2 more years in scattered pockets, but it never again reached the scale of the 52 BC uprising. Alesia had broken the coalition's ability to fight as one. Alesia wasn't the bloodiest battle of the Gallic wars, and it wasn't the most dramatic, no last stand, no duel of champions deciding the outcome. What it was proof of a principle that runs straight through military history, the relationship between engineering and decision-making under pressure. Caesar arrived at Alesia with no clean options. A direct assault would have cost more men than he could afford to lose. Retreat would have handed the initiative to a coalition watching his every move. A conventional siege exposed to a relief army was suicide. The double-wall solution wasn't obvious. It meant accepting real short-term risk to build a long-term advantage, and trusting the system would hold under conditions Caesar couldn't fully predict when the first stake went into the ground. That's the part of the story that usually gets lost, buried under Caesar's own legend. He was a skilled commander, sure. But the real story of Alesia is that the system worked even when Caesar wasn't standing at the exact section of wall under attack. It worked because it wasn't built to depend on any one person in any one place. The system was the commander, Rome noticed. Alesia got studied and taught for centuries afterward. The engineer Vitruvius, writing under Augustus, cited the siege works as a model of rational design, and its principles passed down through Byzantine and later European military thought long after anyone stopped reading Caesar in the original Latin. The idea that a smaller force could beat a bigger one by engineering the battlefield, instead of just fighting on it, became a founding idea of Western military theory. Beyond the battlefield, Alesia marks a turning point in Rome's slow absorption of Gaul. Vercingetorix's defeat didn't end Gallic culture that took generations and happened as much through trade, law, and intermarriage as conquest. But it ended any real chance of unified armed resistance to Rome in the region. The map of Western Europe was set, and it would stay that way for 4 centuries. In the end, Alesia is a story about refusing to play by the rules your enemy hands you. Caesar didn't fight the battle Vercingetorix designed, one of attrition and encirclement where numbers would have decided everything. He built a different battle, one where numbers stopped mattering and fought that one instead. The 40 kilometers of wall didn't defeat 330,000 men. They did something more precise. They broke 330,000 men into a string of smaller, isolated problems, each one small enough for 52,000 well-organized soldiers to solve. That's the real lesson of Alesia. Not that engineering wins wars, and not that clever commanders always win. It's that the side setting the rules of the game beats the side reacting to them, no matter how many men show up to play it. The infrastructure of victory, more often than not, gets built long before the first blow lands. If you like this one, hit like, subscribe, and let me know in the comments. Do you think Vercingetorix ever really stood a chance against Caesar's system? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.